like a ghost. We are recording, and we have Madil Hardis. Is that how I say your name?
Yeah, Madil Hardis. Perfect.
Okay, great. So we're glad to have you on the show. We've been around since 2018. We're almost at 30,000 listeners worldwide, and we interview creative people from actors to poets to musicians. So we're glad to have you on the program.
I'm glad to be here.
So you are a German musician. You're living in London right now, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and your music, you kind of tag it as dark ethereal music, and from 2009 to 2013, you were the lead vocalist and manager of the German Synthpop band, if I can get this right, EYCROMON.
EYCROMON, yes, exactly.
EYCROMON. Yeah, and so you had 2 studio albums, Awake from the Sleepers in 2011 and Repressure in 2013. You co-produced and co-directed several other music videos. And then in 2015, you relocated to London, and then you composed and recorded soundtracks to several short films, The Sacrifice in 2020 and Trinette in 2019, if I didn't get that right. And right now you've got 2 singles in 2020, The Slow Kill and Summer's Lost, that you released this year. So we just wanted to give our fans a little background. But we sent you the questions, so hopefully we can get into it. But do you have anything you'd like to say before we get into the questions?
No. So like those 2 singles that you mentioned are basically the ones that have performed the best. I'm trying to be more creative than usual this year and just trying to bring out a new single every month, which I've done for the majority of this year. Not all are equally successful, obviously, but I'm just trying to follow this new, release model where you basically try to not release an album, but just single after single, and it's actually quite enjoyable. So I'm actually gonna bring out a single probably before the end of this year, as the last thing for this year.
That's interesting. That's a strategy I actually been doing for a while. But I also, because I'm kind of a progressive synth guy, I use like Moogs, and I'm kind of, my heroes are like Keith Emerson and Yes, and Genesis. So it's like I do the singles, but I also do these like concept records. But I have kind of a niche market that's into that.
Yeah.
But I do see that this is kind of a Spotify playlist world, and most of the musicians I've talked to are into this kind of single release every month, and maybe an EP, and then maybe an album, but mostly singles are the strategy I've seen most bands I've talked to.
Yeah. And I have to say, like in the beginning, I was thinking, oh, it's a shame that I'm not really going to be releasing an album for at least a while now. But I gotta say, I like, having time for each individual song and making a video for it, and, spending a whole month just having this one song out there. Because on an album, you always have songs that are never really listened to as much, and only the really true fans will ever hear. And this way, each song gets more attention. It's kind of nice.
Well, I think it's cool too, because then you can have the artwork for each single, and you can create a video, and so you do get the focus. So like when you do an album, it's hard today. Now there are ways to get the individual artwork and little mini videos on your record, because now they have this capable to do a canvas for every song on Spotify, so you can do like 15 seconds worth of a concept. But it's interesting. So let me get to the questions I always ask all the artists. Like, when did you first get into music? Like, at what age did you realize you liked music or you had a capability for music?
Yeah, so I think I started as a child. I had, the wish to learn the piano or maybe the violin, and it just never really happened, probably because I wasn't insistent enough, and I was, doing all kinds of things. But when I was about 15, I suddenly had this really strong wish to become a singer, and I think there were several things. There were some albums from musicians I've heard. I first heard Maria Callas, the opera singer, and then I heard an album by Mariah Carey, and it was just really inspiring, and I thought, this is what I want to do. And I started to take singing lessons, and then eventually it kind of just naturally progressed, and I studied classical singing. And that then led me to do modern music. So it was a long journey with, a lot of different things that I tried. But yeah, I'd say with 15 was the first time I seriously considered doing it.
So is your instrument primarily your voice, or did you learn other instruments like guitars and pianos, or you primarily focus on vocals and lyrics?
Well, I'd say I'm primarily a singer. Though when you study classical singing, you have to learn the piano to some extent as well, and musical theory and all this kind of stuff. So I wouldn't say I'm the best at those things, but you pick up enough to make do. And I can accompany myself. I compose as well, obviously, and I really gotten into synths as well. So obviously, I don't have all the synths that I would like,
Yeah.
but I love to experiment with sound. So that's kind of come at a later time. So in my 20s, but I still think I'm mainly a singer.
That's something I think as a singer-songwriter. A lot of
Yeah.
singer-songwriters might not be the best at their instrument, but I think it's the honesty of
Yeah.
the fact that they're writing their own music.
Yeah.
That, technically you might not be the best guitar player or piano player or synth player, but when it's coming from you as the writer, I think that's the draw in independent music is that you can get people like it used to be like in the 70s, everybody's trying to be like Jimmy Page. Everybody's trying to be like Hendrix. Everybody's trying to be like Coltrane. They're trying to be a technically perfect player. And then that kind of made it so, well, the entrance fee into music is so high. How could you ever be in that group? You're never going to be Clapton, right? But then the idea of like, punk kind of brought this idea with the Clash and the Sex Pistols that, well, anybody who has some honesty and some real feeling could get into it. And then it kind of get into new wave and new romantic. And they said, well, now it doesn't have to be so aggressive. It can be less aggressive. And then you can actually have this kind of independent songwriter come out.
Yeah.
And it's interesting you were in a synth pop band or a synth wave band. Because synth's like where I live. I kind of grew up, I'm in my 50s. I grew up at the beginning of the new wave movement. Joy Division was a big draw, New Order, Depeche Mode, Duran Duran. And I got like, well, what were they playing? So I went to like, well, I found old Jupiters. I found Jupiter 4s and Jupiter 6s and broken Jupiter 8s and Moog, mini Moogs. And I just got, really caught up in that technology of the old analog synths and the warmth of them. And the feel that compared to computer-based music, I just felt like the hardware synths just have something about them that just me drawn into them because they're like having a guitar. Like if you pick up a mini Moog, it's a lot like a guitar. It has a character to it that allowed me to kind of like, well, you can express yourself with these things in a different way. So that's how I got drawn into it. So I've always been very interested in that type of music. And it's interesting. You've got the classical background and kind of got the synth wave, new wave, and you're a songwriter. So you've got a lot of divergent things going on in your background. So it's interesting.
Yeah, there are a lot of influences from different musical worlds. I think what's really interesting is, when you start out as a classical singer, you obviously have to, you have to come to some kind of mastery and you just hone your skills over so many years. And I appreciate when people do the same thing, with synthesizers. There's just so much you can learn about sound and about how to bring it all together. I know some people who have, amazing studios filled to the brink with synths and every kind of microphone and every kind of thing that will change the sound. So I really appreciate that. And I am not at the same level with my sounds than I am with my voice, but I still really enjoy what you can do and creating textures and different layers and just making something that evokes emotion.
So with your voice, do you like to do the kind of like Phil Spector kind of wall of sound layering of your voice when you learn music theory? Do you do like shadow vocals or the different techniques of laying down like different layers and understanding how that can work? Because I guess when you learn music theory, you can find out like, oh wow, with the synthesizer you can lay down all these kind of shadow pads and build something up. And I know that you can do that with your voice because I've seen some documentaries with the Beatles, George Martin talking about production and Phil Spector and other people talking about production. So it's a question like with your voice, do you like harmonizing with yourself?
Yeah, I do that quite a lot. When you have a classical training, then you learn how to construct music. Basically, you do both. You try to compose, but you also try to take things apart that already exist, and you learn from both. And I think a lot of that knowledge just becomes kind of second nature. And you listen to so much music that all that I do, I really just do on intuition. So obviously with chord structures, sometimes I consciously decide what I want, but most of the time I just play and feel my way along and just trying to find something that feels right. And the same is when I do layering, most of the time I'll just switch on the microphone and I just overdub until I have something that I really like and it comes in the moment. And especially the best ideas that I have are the ones where I don't think at all and I just follow my intuition.
That's really interesting. After talking to a
Mm.
lot of musicians for like 2 to 3 years, you have some people who are very like technical composers. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they tend to be more producers, and they're
Yeah.
very much into that like free arrangement. But a lot of
Mm-hmm.
artists I've talked to will say, like, yeah, every time I try to go and compose something technically and really break it out, it
Mm-hmm.
never matches the honesty of this kind of pulling from the universe kind of muse kind of off, in the
Mm-hmm.
moment.
Yeah.
The in the moment things that I come up with always seem to be superior to the things I try to struggle with.
Yeah.
That seems to be the
That's
consensus with most of the people I've talked to.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And because I do my own production as well, it's two different brains that you use. So you have the creative side, and once that is finished and I have everything where I want it, then the rest is really just work and following a lot of rules. Obviously, you also listen and try to make things work, but when I compose, I don't really have any rules. I just try to do what feels right,
Yeah.
and that works out most of the time.
Yeah, 'cause like when I'm with a band, I might come in with a demo, but
Mhm.
if we start jamming, sometimes I'll just throw out the demo and say, what we came up with in the jam session is actually better. you know,
Yeah.
and so it's like, well, I may take pieces of what was in my demo,
Mm.
as a reference, and then kind of let it kind of work itself out. I mean,
Yeah.
so it's interesting. There's like a lot of times, that you do have to kind of feel the universe. It's interesting, like the Robert Moog, the guy who came up with the Moog. He's an inventor, but in his manuals, when you buy a Moog, it said, I let the universe kind of guide me when I built these machines, which was a
Hmm.
really interesting thing for an engineer to kind of talk like a musician. In terms of even the design of the Moog was kind of like he kind of let it just, he had ideas, but he kind of let inspiration come from the muse, just like a musician or a poet, which is
Hmm.
is really interesting. I think that's why a lot of people like those instruments, is because they have that kind of feel.
I think it's very true. And I think when you do that, you draw from just a deeper source. Like everything you've ever heard, experienced, and known, it just, when you get to that deeper level, you just draw on that knowledge that you don't necessarily have actively when you try to come up with plans. So of course it's gonna be better.
Yeah, that's really cool. But so the one thing, so you've been working on music since you were like 15.
Hmm.
So when did you realize that you wanted to write your own material and you wanted to go and and go into like not be classical oriented and go into like pop oriented music?
Yeah.
Because I guess as a classical musician, there's a whole path you could go, but you
Oh
chose to
yeah.
go the other
It's
way.
Exactly. Yeah. It was kind of a conscious choice. So I studied for about 3 years and I felt myself getting more and more unhappy. I still love classical music and I'm actually planning to do some classical projects because why not? But that classical way of singing at an opera house or doing concerts and doing classical recordings and all that, you always have 50 people around you who give you input on how you're supposed to do things. So, of course, you will bring your own way to it, but you have the composer, you have the lyricist, you have a director, you have a conductor, you have people that you work with. There's the traditions of how this music has been done over the centuries. There is a lot of responsibility, and you have hundreds of recordings of how other people have done the same material. It's a very restrictive world. At least it felt like this for me. And
Mhm.
after a few years, I realized that I'm just not happy with that. It kind of makes myself feel anxious and smaller. And then kind of by accident, I discovered a lot of bands like the ones that you mentioned. And in the beginning, also some metal bands, progressive rock. And I was listening to that a lot. And I was thinking, I really love the freedom of this. And I just reached out to a few bands. I found some musicians. I joined my first band. And after a few months, I realized this is what I want to do. This exact thing where I can be on stage, I can be myself, I can be creative, I can write lyrics and melodies. And around that time, EYCROMON was founded. I found a partner who was doing the compositions. I was doing the melodies and the lyrics. And I knew, okay, this is the way for me. And I dropped out of university and just went for it.
That's interesting because I always read biographies of all kinds of musicians. And Tori Amos, the famous piano player, she was in a conservatory and she just didn't feel it. She felt pop.
Yeah.
But she took that classical background and, she used it to kind of merge that classical capability on the piano into pop.
Yeah.
And I always think it's really cool when somebody goes and takes like a genre like Steely Dan took jazz and fusion and then put it into rock. And then work with Motown session musicians to build these kind of really complicated pop songs that normally you wouldn't even think of doing it that way. But it's just anybody who merges like Hendrix, or you get like bands like Sun Ra, an American, experimental bebop jazz band that actually was one of the first jazz bands to use a Moog synthesizer back in the 57, 58. And it's like every time I see somebody that kind of pushes the envelope or changes or mixes genres, I'm always very keen to listen to that. Lou Reed and the Velvets with Andy Warhol. That to me was like, that was a big point for me as a musician to see what you could do with like minimalism and kind of, noise and poetry, like spoken word, and taking spoken word and putting it into music and saying, that you can do that. So I like the idea that in more in like, popular music, that the rules, and there are some producers that try to create rules, but it's kind of wide open if you're willing to push it, and that's what I like about it is that you don't have to stay in your lane.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not all about, achieving commercial success, whatever that even is. It's, for me, firstly, it's about expression, self-expression, and sharing how I see the world with others. And if that means something to them, even better. But it needs to feel true to myself.
Yeah, that's cool, because there's some people that they want to get like on that big train and be like in the top 10, top 30, top 40, and then they allow their music to kind of get molded. And once in a while, you'll get a band that actually has an honest, original idea that gets there. But it seems like a lot of times today you get people trying to run formulas to get there, and it doesn't seem as like if I go listen to pop charts of 74 or 82 or 92, it just seems like there's a little bit more innovation, or people allowing people to do things than it seems like today. There seems to be some set formulas going on. Not that there aren't places where there are people trying things in the kind of different areas, like on the net, like on YouTube and the SoundClouds of the world. But yeah, I tend to go with independent musicians that I like to talk to, just because I want to hear other voices. Like I grew up with college radio in the United States, and that's where you hear bands like REM. You heard bands like the bands that nobody thought were going to make it, and then they did. Like early U2, it was like broken on college radio, and then they became super big. But it just seemed to me like I like hearing, what's new, what hadn't been heard or unexpected, which is why, I do what I do. But it's interesting. You see your influences you mentioned, but maybe we could kind of dive into it a little bit. So when you were learning, you had classical influence, and then you also have like pop oriented influences. Maybe kind of talk about maybe both of them.
Yeah, sure. I mean, with classical music, I was always a big Mozart fan. It's just the amongst the opera composers, he's just the one that I always connected with the most. A lot of the music that people know from Mozart is the more cheerful and happy and witty type of music. but he can also be or like very deep, and there's a lot of darkness there if you can find it. So I was always drawn to those kinds of arias and pieces, and then Schubert and Schumann, basically art songs, are something I really love because again, there's a lot of darkness and a lot of poetry. It's often based on poetry, and that really appealed to me. And on the modern side of things, I think one of the first real big influences for me was Björk.
Oh wow, yeah, she's
I really, yeah, she's just amazing. I mean, on all levels, vocally and in regards to composition and sound,
and visually too, like her visual.
yeah, visually as well. Yeah, exactly. So I think I saw her the first time when I was like 10 or 11 years old with, she had a song in the charts, I think. And I was just thinking, oh my God, what is this? This is really weird and really interesting. And I've been intrigued ever since. And there's some amazing songs she's done. And a lot of the bands you mentioned, from the 80s, obviously Depeche Mode. There's probably too many.
The whole new wave era just was, to me, as a synthesist.
Yeah.
Like Joy Division, I like the starkness of it. And a lot of people might not even pick up that there's synthesizers going on, but there are synthesizers in Joy Division records, and it's very sparse. And it's really cool because if you're a synthesizer player, sometimes that kind of sparseness of it is the innovation. And stuff like Brian Eno did with Bowie was very experimental, like Low in Heroes, that type of work. And Joy Division is kind of like one of the first bands to kind of do that very sparse kind of early new wave. They were like one of the first new wave bands kind of picking up Kraftwerk stuff and doing it in a very sparse way. And I've always been like a big fan of people that innovate with synthesizers. Even like Pete Townsend. He's a guitar player, but if you listen to like Barbara O'Reilly or Won't Get Fooled Again, his use of sequencing and envelope followers and all kinds of cool techniques. Sometimes a guitar player approaches a synthesizer totally different than a keyboard player. And, and you'll get like something out of it. Even Eddie Van Halen with like Jump, how he approached an Oberheim synth and did the chord arrangement. There's just things that sometimes people coming from a different instrument approach another instrument in a different way. And that's always been a big key for me.
I think it's really interesting to look at music from different perspective and as you said before, like melt different influences. I think jazz is a big influence for me too. Ella Fitzgerald, it's just some amazing stuff out there that I used to listen to, and also things like bands like Daft Punk. I absolutely, I mean, that just blows my mind. And all of these things in some ways influence me. I mean, personally, I make more, as I said, like dark ethereal music. It's usually very slow and very melancholic. I also collaborate with other musicians on more like faster types of music, more in the synthwave direction or even gothic. So everything in between is kind of the thing that I like. And
what I like about Slow Kill and Summer's Lost is I like a lot of piano in my music. I use like Roland pianos and Yamaha pianos just because I like adding the piano. I think a piano is like an acoustic guitar. And if you're writing a music, it can evoke a lot of emotion. And I like running at the low BPM. As an electronic musician, a lot of people run at like 160, 220. They get really high BPMs. But I like being at like 40 or 30 BPM. Because then you can kind of do like a dirge. You can let it space out, right? And then you can start throwing in all kinds of effects and granular synthesis and field recordings, and it kind of gets into this kind of Pink Floyd thing where you can layer things. And I always like the idea, like Hendrix and George Martin talked about sound paintings, because like George Martin, when he produced the Beatles, that kind of layering you got on Sgt. Pepper's, it kind of comes from the fact that George Martin had actually produced Peter Sellers' comedy records in the late 50s. And on those records had all this layering of effects and all kinds of things that were going on with backward tape looping and all these things that everybody thinks is like comes from Sgt. Pepper's. But he was actually doing that on these Peter Sellers comedy records. And actually the Beatles were fans of that. And when they came to Sgt. Pepper's, they kind of took the fact that George had that in his toolkit. He knew how to do those things. And they talked about like music in terms of like looking at a painting like a Monet. He's like, you don't always show, you don't necessarily, he didn't say, I don't need to actually capture you guys like you're playing in Germany. I want to capture you guys like how you couldn't really play. Like maybe we can do something in the studio that you can't do live. And I mean, you end up layering something into what is a sound painting. And Hendrix said the same thing about Electric Ladyland. Because people ask me, like, why do you hear these birds and weird cosmic sounds? He said, well, it's a sonic painting. And that always kind of appealed to me that, like, you can actually use the studio to create music that's beyond just, like, the obvious thing that you can play live. But you can turn it into more of a, ethereal thing that you can use your imagination is what you're actually listening to has a little more depth.
Yeah, I think that's very true. It's great to have like a lower tempo because you have just more space that you can fill with, nuances. With the voice, it's the same. You just give it more space to breathe. And I really like this metaphor with the painting. I'm sitting in my room and I'm looking at a painting that I've done because I do that for fun. And I'm realizing that I have like a similar approach for music than I have for doing that. Like it's just the way you compose. It's similar in art than it is in music. You just try to create something that works together. Yeah,
that's kind of like a lot of, I also have these questions about like recording techniques. And I would just say like my recording technique, I tried using DAWs. And I just didn't like them because I actually, I'm in my 50s and I used to use Fostex and Tascam, tape recorders. Yeah. And I would capture all my Moogs and all my hardware synths, quarter-inch line into a hardware recorder. And I decided I still do it that way because there's something about being able to directly record and not have a limitation of a computer compressing something or doing something and then actually having to play it until you get it right, So I'll go back and keep on playing a part and then layer them on a hardware recorder and then eventually get it to like a WAV file. But I just like the idea of building the song kind of like in the old school way that was done in the 70s and the 80s before computers. Because then you can do whatever you want, and it's a little harder to keep things together because you don't have the added computer assistance, but it's just a different way of doing it. I actually find it's more free.
I think limitations can have a sort of freedom. I know a lot of filmmakers that love to shoot on film, like actual film, not digitally, which is nowadays the majority of filmmaking, just because the limitations are really nice. Obviously, you get a different quality of the image, and with the sound, it's the same. You get a different quality. There's something to it that just feels like it's, it has more character.
It feels more organic. There's stuff like
exactly.
There's more stuff coming through onto the tape than I get on the digital. For some reason, the digital, I hear things getting compressed. And if I'm using analog instruments, if I'm using a Yamaha piano, I'm using a Moog, or I'm using like a Prophet 5, I really don't want to get clipped by a computer because there's something about the signals on those things that are so big and they're so fat and they're so warm that sometimes the digital stuff just takes it out. And I just I'm not going to take it out.
It just makes it all sound the same. And I think that's the problem with, the really popular music nowadays, that it all is so cleaned and so perfected and so dehumanized that it doesn't feel real anymore. It doesn't sound real anymore.
Yeah, it is a little too clean. I mean, I hear the bells, digital stuff, you can do really good bells. You can do very good percussive, like wood blocks and stuff. But when it comes to like analog synths, have such a wide bandwidth when you record. In some ways, I heard stories that recording engineers started going against analog synths when the DX7 from Yamaha came out because the FM synthesis didn't take up as much bandwidth in the mix. Right? And so it started this kind of clean nature that we continues to today with the soft synths where everything's kind of clean and too perfect. And, engineers like it, but it's like, I understand why they like it, but it's like, it takes the kind of heart out of some of what was done. If you listen to like Pink Floyd or Yes or Genesis, you don't hear a lot of electronic bands sound like that anymore because they're running too many digital synths. and you don't
Yeah.
hear the Hammond organs, you don't hear the Wurlitzers, you don't hear the Moogs, and there's something about those on those old records, and even on vinyl, that you just can't capture digitally. And so, like, I'm kind of a pure electronic musician. People are like, "Oh, you're electronic, you're a DJ." It's like, no, I'm a kind of like Moog, Hammond B3 Wurlitzer guy. You know, it's a different thing. It's like, you try to tell people, like, electronic doesn't just mean like DJ or EDM. It's like, it goes back to, like, you know, Keith Emerson and, you know, like Bernie Worrell from Funkadelic. It's like, that's a different type of electronic.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, I have to say I do a lot of music on the computer. I have a piano and I start all my compositions from there. And I think I do that because you need something real. I mean, I have my voice, which is real. And then with the piano and the voice, you can just do something without having to open your laptop.
Yeah.
And that is where it all happens. That's where the magic happens. And then the rest is you know, dressing and yeah, there's sound design and all of that. And to be honest, if I could, I would definitely want to work more analog than I am doing.
Yeah, I think
it's at the moment.
As people are able to, they you know, it's something that's like a luxury, you know,
Yeah.
unless you happen to have them. It's like in today's world, it's like your phone. You're not going to carry a record player around because your phone's going to be easier. But if you can't listen to music, I'd rather listen to it on vinyl. But I can't bring my vinyl player on the bus. So okay, well then I got to compromise. But yeah, and then you have to deal with it. You can get access to a million sounds on your computer. If you're on a mini Moog, you know, you probably got, you know, hundreds of thousands of sounds, but not a million sounds. So so yeah, I can understand why a lot of people, even in hip hop, you know, you don't have the room or access if you're living in Brooklyn to a big thing. So yeah. It's kind of like a compromise. I mean, I have my digital stuff, I have my analog stuff. It's just I have a lot more analog. So when you record today, have you been able to get to studios, or are you just doing everything on a DAW at home and sending it like via like the internet, or are you able to physically get to a studio? And what's your preferred method, I guess, pre-COVID or even during COVID recording? Do you like to physically go to studios, or do you do stuff from home and then work with producers?
Yeah, so I've done both. There's obviously a lot of comfort when you're in the studio because that implies there's someone else who takes care of the sound and the mix and everything, and you just go there and all you do is sing at that moment, or, you know, play an instrument, and that's really nice because it enables you to just focus on that. But I mean, there's for financial reasons and also for being independent and autonomous, especially this year, I do prefer the home recording for the moment because I have my setup. It's there. I never take it off. Like, I have my little booth with everything ready to go. So whenever I feel like now I'm going to write a song and now I'm going to record something, I can do that. I can do that in the middle of the night. It's very convenient and it serves my needs best. It took me some time to find a microphone that I really like and that is affordable, but I found one. Don't ask me which it is. I forget these things.
What's your favorite microphone? What's the one you like to use?
Oh, the one I would love to use is a Neumann. I tried that once. I think in the studio it's a 2K microphone that I can't afford at the moment.
Yeah, those are kind of out there.
Yeah, but I have one that I really like and that has a really nice and warm sound, and that's the main thing for me. My piano's there, everything is ready to go. And I work with Logic Pro. That's how I learned to produce. I used Cubase in the past as well, but I kind of got stuck on Logic Pro. And it works for me. I know how to, like, I have a shorthand with all of these things, and so I can really just focus on being creative.
I think that's great. I mean, I've been, you know, I have always had a home studio. I've been like this I invested in it as soon as I started getting my analog synths, and I have like a bedroom studio, and kind of like whenever I want to, I just do what I want. And and I always thought it was, you know, a good way to connect. I even have it set up so I can run cameras and do like live shows from my home studio. And so so I just feel like before COVID, I used to do it. I was on Twitch and Facebook Live 3 years ago. doing it. And it's just kind of like now the world's kind of caught up to what I was doing all the time. But it's just interesting where, you know, I would go to New York and I go play and I pack everything up and get road cases and get roadies and do it all. But now I can just stay in my studio and it's like, wow, that's cool. I don't have to actually pack this stuff up and go. But it is the one thing I just miss though is the feedback of playing live. Because if I go to New York and play in a club in New York, even if it's only 300-400 people, that when you get that kind of live feel, I think as a musician, you know, even like a keyboardist, I can kind of I'll play differently if I feel the crowd giving me a vibe.
Yeah,
and it will bring out things that maybe I wouldn't have done if I just played in my studio.
Yeah, that's very true. It's just a very different thing. It's a thing completely on its own, and it's irreplaceable. Like I've done actually this week I've done a YouTube concert of some sort, and I've done like various things online, but it's nice, but it's not the same when you are in a room with people, whether it's 10 or 100 or 1,000. There's just something there that you feel everyone's attention and everyone's feelings about what you do, and that's just irreplaceable.
Yeah, I think musicians, we kind of like are very organic in our approach. You know, it's like an actor that does like Broadway stage versus doing film and TV. You know, some actors will say, well, I really like it when I'm on that Broadway stage in New York or the opera, because they get that immediate feedback. Not that you don't get it from the director, but you get it from the crowd. And I think an actor or a poet or a musician, when you pick up that feedback from the crowd, it just comes back. It's like bi-directional, like, you know, in the moment. There's nothing like it. A lot of musicians kind of feed on it, and some musicians have a hard time without it. You know, they kind of depend on it, and it's harder for them to be as creative without it.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, this year I've done a lot of collaborations with people, but it was all online. So you never get to see the person. You're never in the same room. You never get the opportunity to just, you know, jam and experiment, just, you know, letting go and seeing what happens. It's much more efficient, of course, because you send one file, you get one back. There's a back and forth. It's very clean and fast, and that has advantages. But I do miss, you know, the actual exchange that happens when you are making music with people.
Yeah, it's like the difference. Like when I used to play with my band, you know, and I was like the primary writer, you know, I'd come and I have the bass lines, I have the drum beats worked out, I'd have the chord patterns all worked out. But then it's like, okay, if I do a bass on my Moog, I can do pretty good. But a real bass player is going to bring something to it, right? So I get to the practice and they reinterpret the bass line, and I'm like, I know you're going to do what a bass player is going to do. I did what a Moog can do. Well, you're going to do what a real acoustic bass can do, or a real electric bass can do. And it's that kind of give and take as when you're composing with a band, you know, that everybody brings something to it. You know, the chords change, you know, in the tone and the color. Like you might, you know, pick Beatle chords versus like, you know, different type of chords, like jazz oriented chords or fusion, you know, rap, whatever. It just that kind of collaboration is what's the key secret sauce to everything.
It's the sum is really more than the parts, and there's just something magical that happens when everyone with their influences and their experience brings something different to it, and it creates something new, and you create it on the spot. In every rehearsal, every show is going to be slightly different.
Yeah, it's always, to me, what I love about music is like a lot of things today when we talk about being too perfect. Some of the greatest music I've ever heard is the reason it sounds good is that there actually was a mistake, right? There was like a key change that wasn't expected, or it's a little off on the rhythm, or the singing's a little not as perfect as maybe it could be, but it has an honesty or changed the structure in a way that actually made it a better song.
I mean, for example, I could never imagine, you know, the Beatles songs in the way that music is recorded today. It just wouldn't be right. Like there's so much character in every, you know, every backing vocal, in every piano line. Like it's just very different from what we do today. And
yeah, it's like I think
yeah.
the chaos is taken out. I think a lot of times people don't realize there's a certain level of chaos or a certain level of imprecision in music. And like in jazz, it's totally understood. You know, when I played jazz, like we go off and we do key changes. You go and do things, you know, you kind of go into chaos and you come back. Like in fusion, you'll go off and then you come back, you go off, you come back. That's kind of what it is. You have some central themes and you're allowed to kind of, you know, everybody comes back. But in pop music today, there's less of that. There used to be more of that. You know, if you listen to Jimi Hendrix, Mitch Mitchell as a drummer is not keeping the beat. He's kind of soloing through the whole song, kind of like Keith Moon in The Who. He would solo through the whole song. He wasn't a precision drummer. And I always like drummers that are like Mitch Mitchell or Keith Moon. They're less precise because I think that brings character to the song. And today you have so many producers that are like, oh, go do it again. You got to get perfect 120, perfect 130. Like, no, sometimes it's good to have that a little bit of chaos, a little bit of off the beat, you know, that kind of actually makes the song sound better.
Yeah, it's just dynamics. I mean, it needs to be lived, and in classical music, that's totally normal as well. That you have tempo changes all the time. It's something that comes out of whoever is doing the music together. It becomes something. It sounds different. It feels different. The tempo has to be different. It has to adjust to the person. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something I always try to tell some of the younger kids. They're like, why is the beat shifting so much when I'm on the grid? Because like that's the way I write it. You know, and I kind of want it that way. But so it's interesting. So you said you use Logic. You're using your home studio. You have used traditional studios. And I know you played live, you know, when you were in your band. Before you, after you left your band before COVID, were you playing live?
Well, actually, the last 2 years, I focused more on filmmaking. So when I came here in 2015, I was coming here to study screenwriting, and then I just started out in film production, and I've made some short films. I scored music for some short films, and I mainly focused on that. And only about 2 years ago, I started to properly work in music again, and now it's my main focus. So yeah, the last few years I had, you know, the odd concert here or there, but I actually haven't gotten the chance to properly get back to the stage. Obviously, during EYCROMON, I had a lot of concerts and was on stage a lot, and that was really nice. And beforehand, when you're a classical musician, you also are constantly on stage, and that's very different from, you know, as a modern musician, because you have, in classical music, you have no technical assistance usually. And then when you start out playing with a band, suddenly there's all kinds of things. There's a microphone, and there's a monitor, and then there's the PA, and in the beginning it's overwhelming.
That's interesting because you know, the Beatles, you know, they were the big touring band, and then they said we're not touring no more, and they kind of created on the art. And I always thought that was kind of cool because I don't know if you would have got, you know, like the White Album and Abbey Road if they were always touring, because there was so much focus on the actual craft of music. And I think it's really good for bands to spend time crafting, because a lot of bands, they get stuck on the kind of touring kind of thing, and then maybe they get 2-3 weeks to record an album, and then they, you know, and they don't have the time to actually put into it. And one thing I've talked to a lot of bands during COVID is they've kind of used it as a, you know, a bit of a blessing, and they can actually spend time crafting their art more time than they ever had before, to actually put something together that's maybe a little more ambitious than what they were going to do before.
I find that very true. I mean, this whole year obviously was difficult for many reasons, but in regards to music and being creative, it was a really good year for me, because beforehand I was always busy with a lot of film related things, and that can take up a lot of your time. And I was I was not having the amount of time for music that I would have needed, because nowadays, if you want to, you know, find your following online, you have to release on a regular basis. You can't just release a song every half year and that's it. There has to be more. And yeah, this year gave me the right momentum to do just that. And I don't think I've ever produced so much music at such a short time. And it's been really great because, you know, as I'm a filmmaker, I can make my own music videos as well. So I could use my home studio to create a song and then socially distant, make a video, and then put it out there. And yeah, I wouldn't have been able to do that if it wouldn't have been for the craziness that this year was.
So does film really help? Because today, a lot of musicians were kind of, without being able to perform, and the way we get paid through streaming services, you know, a lot of musicians, they make money. The bands I talk to, they make more money selling a T-shirt than in selling a button or a poster than they do selling a record. And then the other way they make money is actually doing a live show. So, you know, whether they're in a van or a little bus driving all over the U.S., they make more money doing a show, and then at that show selling a merch than they actually make off of the streaming. And then without that being able to stream, they're having a harder time actually, you know, paying their bills. If they didn't have those other sources like sync licensing or doing films or doing advertising. So since you're doing films, have you been able to like entertain the other things like sync licensing and other types of linkages to get your art out in other ways than just standard music distribution?
Well, to be honest, I mean, I've done film music. I haven't really done this for someone that wasn't directly related to me project-wise. So I've mainly done it for people that I personally know or myself. So I haven't done any true licensing yet. I've been very lucky because in the last 2 years I managed to make my income from art in different ways. So I do a lot of art-related marketing, crowdfunding, music marketing, and those sorts of things, helping other artists to get their projects off the ground, which is really rewarding and really interesting because you get to meet so many interesting people from all over the world. I'm with a crowdfunding platform called Greenlit, and they're focusing solely on art crowdfunding. And so that's something I kind of had, you know, the ability to decide a few years ago whether I wanted to make music money directly from music. So I had some offers for cover bands that are really well booked, or doing music abroad, you know, in hotels and stuff like that. And on the one hand, it's always very tempting to think I have to do nothing else. I just do music. During the day, I can write my own music, and in the evenings, I just play. But it just wasn't really for me. And I think this is, you know, the better combination for me. And I decided that I want to be completely autonomous with how I make my music. I don't want to depend on it financially at the moment. So I'm completely free to say, you know, fuck this. I don't want this. I don't want to make this style of music anymore. I switch to something else just because I feel like it. And so
that's what's good about being an independent artist. I think a lot of people, it used to be like, you know, when I was coming up, when I was like in my teens, you know, playing like pizza bars and stuff. Everybody wanted to get on a small indie label and get in a Econoline van and go driving around. But I kind of got into this idea, well, you know what? I'm going to have a good day job. I'm an IT guy, right? So I do like information technology. I've got enough money that I can do what I want. And I kind of decided I'm just going to write the kind of music I want and see if the audience just finds me. And over time, I've been able to build up an audience through the podcast. I found another way to do things through this podcast. I found other ways to do like influence marketing, different stuff like that. And so I can kind of do what you're doing. I can create the ghost music the way I want without any producer or company telling me, oh, you can't do that. And that to me has been very satisfying because then I can just work on whatever project I want, collaborate with people. I just collaborated with a poet from Canada. Some spoken word stuff. I was doing some stuff with some models in Sweden on some different EDM type of projects. And you can just do whatever you want, you know, and you don't have to have somebody tell you, oh, that's not going to work. It's like, well, you know, you don't control that.
Exactly. It gives you a lot of freedom, especially like, the mental freedom to not feel obligated to do something in a certain way. And I I know so many musicians from, the niches that I've been in, and they have, thousands, sometimes 100,000, sorry, 100,000 fans, and they still have a day job because it's just difficult to finance your life as a musician. As you mentioned, I mean, streaming platforms pay ridiculously little money for streams, and I have, I have like a kind of divided opinion myself about that, because on the one hand, it's great the way that everything works nowadays, because we have the opportunity to reach people all over the world with our music that it would never have been possible in the same way 10 or 20 years ago. On the other hand, obviously, it's not really fair the way musicians are paid through those services. So.
Yeah, my whole thing, I think, with the fan, ever since like Napster came about, because I kind of grew up like I picked up Purple Rain on vinyl, right? When it first came out, Sign of the Times, I picked up on vinyl, because I'm at the age where that's what it was. But the thing is like kids today, they're not willing to spend money on musicians like they do. Like I know kids that will. I have a daughter, she'll tip a YouTuber like $20, but she won't buy physical record. And so there's like, or kids buy $60, $70 Xbox and PlayStation video games, and they're not willing to spend money on bands. And when I grew up, it's like kids would go spend money on bands, but now it seems like entertainment is more other things. And so as musicians, we have to find ways. Well, as an electronic musician, I might be able to do a soundtrack for a Rockstar game if I can get in on that, So maybe there's ways to kind of get into the new media and get, somehow into that YouTube audience or into that gamer audience, and find a way to get into that, and find record companies to try to get us into different ways of marketing our music where we don't get like 0.004 of a penny. Where it's valued. But I think ever since like Napster and iTunes, the valuation of musicians, our work has become very low in terms of the money value compared to when at the height of the industry, even then musicians were getting like 10 cents off a record. They cost $10. $10 record and you're getting 10 cents. So, I guess it's like the same thing.
In a way, I guess, yeah. I mean, it's the thing is, it is what it is, and I don't really see that turning around. I think it's the same with film. Like once people are used to a service like Netflix, it's hard to. I mean, who's buying DVDs anymore if it's not something very specific that you can't find anywhere else? It's the same with music. I don't think the trend is going away from that. There might be different platforms. Spotify might vanish eventually, and something else will come around. But I think the trend is going even more towards this.
Yeah, the only other thing I found is like vinyl. Like if you can create like a little micro niche with vinyl. Like if I go to New York City and I show up in a club with like 100 vinyl copies of my record, I could sell them for $30 each, and I can actually make more money on that 100 set of vinyls than I make on my Spotify for like a year. It's crazy because I can make a little micro batch of 500 or 1,000 vinyls and make more money than I do if I did like 100,000 plays on Spotify.
Yeah, that's very true. I know a little German lady not lady, a German label that does the same thing. They have selected artists. They produce a lot of vinyl, sometimes cassettes as well, because there's a nostalgia for that. And they they have a lot of people that are interested in that. I think there is an opportunity for musicians to have a niche, like a smaller group of fans maybe that are more interested in getting involved in a deeper level, and then providing them with all kinds of things that create a deeper relationship with the musician. The majority, though, the majority will just listen and maybe not even click like or anything, or not even safe. They will just listen and like it, and that's it. And you never hear from them.
Yeah, it's like your hardcore fans, they might buy a fanzine from you.
Okay,
If you
yeah.
build a fanzine, they might buy buttons and posters and t-shirts and vinyl. And
Yeah.
I've seen so many American small bands are actually, they really have survived during COVID on t-shirts and vinyl and tape cassettes and buttons and USB drives and physical stuff, little fanzines that have pictures and posters. Those fans are willing to buy that, and like I said, the small quantity of like 1,000 of any of these things, you actually make more money than you do on the other stuff. And so it's kind of like you can run your own website and actually do okay as a little small business. It takes a lot of work to put the stuff together. It takes you away from your music a little bit. But it's all part of it. To me, it's like if you're trying to be independent, that's part of it. That's stuff that the record company used to do. And now if you want to kind of take, control, then sometimes you have to find that is where you have to go. If you're a creative person, some of that stuff is fun. I like the creativity of it, and the art associated with a vinyl. You have to work with an artist. You can put in, their lyric sheets, and it kind of becomes a big project. It becomes like a thing in itself. It's like working on. Yeah, I think it's cool, but it's just sad that we can't make it the other way without that.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it all has its pros and cons. I, personally enjoy the marketing side of things as well, especially when you see that it brings results and you find, listeners from places you've never heard of, and you have little fan bases, in a country where you wouldn't have expected that they might like your music. So it's all relative. Like, obviously, I would love to spend all my day just making music, but some of the other stuff can be rewarding too.
Yeah, so you're on track. For this year going into 2021. You're still on track doing like one song a month. Is your strategy going into 2021?
Yeah. I've actually, like, the last few weeks I've done one every 3 weeks, just to, I had this too much scheduled because the thing is, like, I'm quite like, for me, writing a song doesn't take that long. It's usually like it all comes up, like it's like a suspense that builds up for a few days and then it kind of just rushes out. So I kind of have that ready when I need to produce something new, and I'm really looking forward to that. So I just produce more than I can release, so I've been keeping that rhythm, and I intend to do so for the foreseeable.
That's an interesting thing, because like I remember I was watching a documentary on Prince. I'm a big Prince fan, but he one of the guys around him, one of his friends, said that like Prince felt like he wrote a song and he felt like, well, this is today. I want to release it today because this is relevant to people today. Because I wrote it like today. And so he always wanted to release more than what the market could digest. Because he was like, music was so much a part of him. And he lived in his recording studio, was his house. And he just wrote all the time. He's writing like 4 or 5 songs a day for most of his life as a recording artist. And it just made this massive backlog that was hard to digest in his era. Now today, like it's probably more digestible. Because I picked up like the new version of Sign of Times. It's like 8 hours long. It has like all the stuff that he wanted to put out, and it's just interesting that today's market can seem to digest more. That people are able to accept an artist doing a song every 3 weeks or every month. It's kind of like the 50s. In the 1950s. Motown, they would put songs out like every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, and just because they wanted to see what was going to hit the wall. They didn't know if it was going to work, and they just keep on putting them out. Which is what it seems like is happening on Spotify. Like what you said, you have some that work, some that don't, and you just keep on doing it and see what works.
Yeah, you learn what the audience likes, and I'm not, as I said before, I kind of want to do music firstly for myself, so I put out what I what I want to put out. But it's also very interesting for me to see how people react to my music. And so if I see there's a certain type of music that that fans really love, then it inspires me to do something in the similar direction, just because I get the feedback. So that's quite interesting. You learn about yourself a lot as well during that process because you get so much feedback.
Yeah, I think that's what's great about social media, because like you can immediately see, you know, your Spotify numbers, you can see your iTunes number, you can see all these numbers right away, and then you can even have feedback coming into your social media, into your Instagram, your Facebook, your Twitter, and it's just, you know, you can go online with your fans and see your fans jump in and give you immediate feedback if you do like an Instagram Live or Facebook Live or Twitch. I think it's just that's what's really cool today about the technology. I mean, I've been investing in more like online capabilities to do like green screens, multiple camera angle shots, and video mixers, just because if I can't go to New York and play, then I might as well, you know, use my budget for going to New York to buy that stuff.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah,
you know,
I'm looking into the whole streaming thing as well. I definitely want to do a bit of that next year.
Yeah, because there's so much things today. The only thing I would like for a future state of music is to have like a Pro Tools Live that allows you to like integrate with another person's Pro Tools and actually record live. That you know, with the latency issues, but you know, if somebody can figure it out with 5G and the new types of internet technologies, to be able to go into your DAW, be able to see a video of another person in their studio and live record albums like you're really there, you know. And I think that would be really, given COVID and other things that could happen beyond COVID, that gives musicians, you know, that have their own home studios, the ability to collaborate in a way that we hadn't done before. That would be really cool. I mean, I'm an IT guy, so I'm kind of pushing for that.
Yeah, I would love that. That sounds like a great thing. Someone please invent this.
Yeah, I don't think we're too far off from that. I think the musicians have been, you know, talking about it. I've talked to a bunch of musicians in the last year. One of them told me there was something kind of like it in a beta stage. There are people actually working on stuff like that. I tried it out, wasn't all the way there. But I think it's going to be coming. So great talking to you. And we are actually a part of Spotify. And this is going to be on 11 podcast platforms when we publish it in the next hour, including Apple and Radio Public and Overcast. So once we publish, it goes out and migrates to 11 podcast platforms all over the world. And we will push it on our story on Instagram, which will have the Spotify version as a clickable version that you can go right to that version on Instagram.
Cool.
And we'll send you the link to Spotify, Apple, and Anchor within the next hour. We'll push this out.
Perfect.
So
sounds amazing.
Yeah, thank you for being on the show. We love to talk to artists all over the world. If any other artists you know would like to be on a podcast, let them know we do this. And
I will definitely do that.
Yeah,
thanks so much for having me. It was a really, really great conversation.
Oh, great. I hope you have a great rest of your day. What time is it there right now? Because here it's like
it's 6 p.m.
Oh, it's not so bad.
No.
We're like 1:05 p.m. New York City time, so
all right.
We're cool. So thank you very much for being on the show again. If you have anything next year you want to talk about, we have people come on the show multiple times. So in a couple of months, 6 months or so, if you want to be back on and show people where you are, and we'll talk about some of the other material at that point. Yeah,
sounds great.
We can do that.
Amazing. Thank you so much.